So I feel like it's time that we need to have a conversation about the Denver Broncos offensive line. There's this public perception out there that the Denver Broncos offensive line this offseason has gone from one of their biggest weaknesses to one of their biggest strengths. Mostly due to injuries, but also due to inconsistent play from both the unit themselves as well as poor quarterback play. They gave up a league-high 55 sacks last year. Now, I'd say about 20 of those sacks were on Russell Wilson, but that still leaves 30 sacks that were on the Broncos offensive line, which is absolutely inexcusable. To bolster the unit this offseason, the team signed Ben Powers and Mike McGlinchey in free agency. Powers was given a 4-year, $51.5 million deal, and McGlinchey was given a 5-year, $87.5 million deal. So that is some big money to upgrade this unit. Now, Ben Powers is a guy that I have a lot of confidence in. He's one of the best run-blocking offensive linemen in the NFL, and he did a really good job last season in a run-blocking heavy scheme in Baltimore. I really feel like that's going to translate well here in Denver, and as a pass blocker, I feel like Ben Powers is underrated as well. This is the signing that I feel the most confident about this offseason for the Denver Broncos out of pretty much almost all of our free agent signings in general. Now, the conversation that I want to have is with Mike McGlinchey. I did a film study on Mike McGlinchey a couple months ago when we first signed him. I studied his game against the Denver Broncos. I also went back and I watched several other of his games on All 22 tape, and they looked pretty much the same as his Denver Broncos game. He's somebody that is super consistent as a run blocker. He is a top tier run blocking tackle. He gets to the second level really well. He moves laterally super well. I really like what Mike McGlinchey has to offer as a run blocker, but my biggest issue with him is his lack of consistency as a pass blocker. And it's really due to inconsistent technique. There are times where he has a perfectly fine anchor and a perfectly solid base and he wins his rep just fine, but there are other times where his anchor and his base are all over the place and he is inconsistent with his hand placement, and that leads to him getting beat in pass protection at least 3 or 4 times a game in an absolutely ugly fashion. Then there were games throughout the season last year where those 3 to 4 bad plays in pass protection would turn into 6 to 7, and he would give up multiple pressures in a game throughout multiple games. That's not good. The Broncos have been desperately trying to find a fix at the right tackle position. We have started over 20 different players at that position since 2014 when Orlando Franklin moved from right tackle to left guard, but it's not for a lack of trying, man. The Broncos have thrown a lot of money out at guys such as Menelik Watson, Jawan James, DeMar Dotson, Donald Stevenson. All kinds of guys were paid big money at that right tackle position, and nobody's panned out to this point. Mike McGlinchey is the most consistent player out of probably all 20 guys who have started for us at right tackle. But that said, I still feel like the Broncos gave Mike McGlinchey too much money, and there's a chance that Mike McGlinchey could be a massive bust here in Denver. I don't want to say that because I don't want to entertain the possibility of another bust at right tackle. I don't want to entertain the possibility of another Jawan James situation. And while I don't think it's going to be that bad, I still think there's a chance that Mike McGlinchey will not live up to the amount of money that the Broncos paid him, and that the Broncos may have some significant buyer's remorse with him. I really hope that's not the case, and I really hope that working with an all-pro offensive lineman and an offensive line coach in Zach Strief will help him get more consistent with his base, his anchor, and his hand placement, and just his overall technique. But Mike McGlinchey, man, I wasn't thrilled with this signing at all when we initially made the move. And after I dove deep into his tape, that confirmed my suspicions with him. So I'm really hoping that Mike McGlinchey will display a lot more than what he displayed in San Francisco, because I'm a little concerned that Denver gave him too much money. The Broncos have 3 returning starters on their offensive line this year in Garrett Bowles, Lloyd Cushenberry, and Quinn Miners. First of all, with Bowles, he's obviously coming off of a season-ending broken ankle that he suffered last season in Week 5 against the Indianapolis Colts. In 2020, Bowles finally took that massive step forward that we were hoping he would take under Mike Munchak, and he made his first All-Pro list of his career, and he was one of the best tackles in the NFL. He did regress quite a bit in 2021, and in 2022, he was not looking even close to that All-Pro level. Per reports, his relationship with Broncos offensive line coach last season, Butch Barry, was absolutely terrible, and Butch Barry was a guy who burned a lot of bridges with a lot of players in that offensive line room. We made a whole other video earlier in the offseason discussing that. So I'm hoping this season, now that the cancer that was Butch Barry has been cut out of the Broncos building, that Bowles will finally look closer to his all-pro self in 2020. With Quinn Miners, he's somebody who Broncos country has a lot of hopes for. He's a guy who has insane power with his game. He's a mauler up front, a top-tier road grader, a top-tier run blocker, but I also feel like he's somebody who needs to get more consistent with his technique as well, especially as a pass blocker. It feels like he too often relies on his power, and there are times where more athletic players than him will beat him. That's not saying that Miners wasn't one of our best offensive linemen last season, but at the same time, saying that he doesn't have a lot of work to do to get better in his craft, that would be a false statement. He has a lot of work to do. He's got to get better with his technique, and he's got to be able to get more consistent with not relying on his power in order to be a top-tier guard in the NFL, because I really believe that he can get there. Dalton Risner never took that next step in his development. He never was able to rely on his agility and his technique. He was somebody who consistently got beat by more athletic rushers than him because he couldn't get more agile with his game. So I'm really hoping that Quinn Miners can hone in on that this year, because he's a player that I really, really love on our offensive line and I have high hopes for, but at the same time, to say that Quinn Miners is where he needs to be in his development, again, would be a false statement. Then, of course, there is Lloyd Cushenberry. Oh man, Lloyd Cushenberry. I don't know why the Broncos didn't more adequately address the center position this offseason. We've got Alex Forsyth, who we drafted in the 7th round. We've also got Luke Wattenberg, and we signed Kyle Fuller as well, who worked with Russell Wilson in Seattle. Kyle Fuller, he's listed as a guard here on our lads, but he is officially a center. That is his natural position. So, oh man, with Lloyd Cushenberry consistently overwhelmed as a pass protector, lack of play strength, the mental part of the center position, I feel like he handles really well, and that's why the Broncos have brought him back. But I feel like he really needs to hit the weight room and bulk up, honestly, in order to be a more effective starting center in the NFL. I've been pretty hard on Lloyd Cushenberry this offseason, but at the same time, I feel like it's for good reason, because he has not played well in the NFL, and he was, much like Dalton Risner, drafted to be our center of the future, and at this point, he hasn't displayed that he can be our center of the future. He's entering a contract year this year, so this is put up or shut up time for Lloyd Cushenberry, and the Broncos are going to give him one last chance to be our starting center of the future, and if he doesn't make hay this season, then he's going to be gone. Behind our starting 5, I also have some significant concerns about depth. Cam Fleming coming back to the team was a very underrated move. I loved that move quite a bit. There were points last year where, just in terms of consistency, Cam Fleming looked like our best offensive lineman out there. He played both left tackle and right tackle for us at various points in the year, and in my opinion, Cam Fleming is one of the best swing tackles in the NFL. So I'm confident that in the event that Garrett Bowles or Mike McGlinchey get hurt, that Cam Fleming can step in and bring that same high-level play that he brought at the tackle position for the past 2 years that he's been here in Denver. Besides Cam Fleming, though, I do have some concerns about depth, especially at guard for the Broncos. The Broncos don't really have any true, pure guards that I feel confident about as depth pieces. Right now, they've got Kyle Fuller and Quinn Bailey listed as our 2 main backup guards. Quinn Bailey is naturally a tackle, and Kyle Fuller is naturally a center. Henry Bird, an undrafted free agent from 2023, is really the only true guard that the Broncos have as a depth piece. The rest of these guys are another position posing as a guard. Same goes here for William Sherman, who is a natural tackle. He's somebody who I believe did play some guard, but naturally, again, he is a tackle, not a guard. At center, we already talked about some of the depth there. With Luke Wattenberg, he's a guy who really struggled last year. Although most of his reps last season were at an unnatural position, he was asked to fill in at guard. So I'm curious to see if he looks any better at his more natural position of center. But even in training camp last year, I didn't feel like Luke Wattenberg looked very comfortable out there at the NFL level. He was overwhelmed by the mental aspect of the center position. He was overwhelmed by a lack of play strength. He was overwhelmed by just not knowing what his assignment was out there. I feel like Luke Wattenberg really looked like a fish out of water when he had to play last year. And again, it was at an unnatural position. So if he gets some more work in at the center position, he may get better. But I don't have a whole lot of confidence in Luke Wattenberg moving forward. Alex Forsyth, though, is a guy that I'm really intrigued by. He was our 7th round draft pick out of Oregon, and he was a multi-year starter there at center for them. He's somebody I really like. He's got play strength, which is something that Lloyd Cushenberry and Luke Wattenberg don't have, and he's also got a really high mental acumen at the center position. At the end of the day, the main reason why he ended up dropping in the draft, in my opinion, was due to poor combine testing. But aside from that, I really like almost everything else about Alex Forsyth's game, and I think there's a chance that he could end up as our starting center at some point in the future, maybe even this season if Lloyd Cushenberry and Luke Wattenberg don't perform up to scratch. As far as other depth pieces on the offensive line, I do like Isaiah Prince as a depth guy. He's somebody who has some starting experience from his time in Cincinnati, although he wasn't very effective as a starter. I do feel like in terms of a swing guy, especially the second swing guy behind Cam Fleming, in the event that we have to see Isaiah Prince, which I hope is never, because I hope we don't have 2 injured starting tackles, but I do feel like Isaiah Prince could at least come in for 1 or 2 games and at least look competent out there in the event that he has to play. But in the event that he has to play means that the Broncos got bit by the injury bug again, so we gotta hope that that doesn't happen. And then finally, we've got some backup tackles in Christian DeLauro, Alex Palczewski, and Demontre Jacobs. They may compete for a spot on the practice squad, but I don't see any scenario at all where these players make the active roster. They're guys who I feel like are nothing more than rotational depth pieces at the NFL level at their ceiling. So I don't see any scenario where these guys make the Denver Broncos active roster. So the question that I posed at the beginning of this video was, did the Denver Broncos truly do enough to upgrade their offensive line? I'm going to say no, I don't think they did. They still have a lot of question marks, especially at the center position, the right guard position to a certain extent, and the right tackle position to a certain extent. Then when it comes to depth, while I do feel confident for the most part about our tackle depth, I don't really feel confident about our guard depth. And I'm really concerned because in the event that Ben Powers or Quinn Miners get hurt, we may have to insert somebody whose natural position is not guard into the guard position, and that's something that would be really concerning to me. So the Broncos, I feel like, still have multiple question marks on the offensive line, both in terms of starters and in terms of depth pieces. So the Broncos did do some good work on their offensive line this offseason. You can't deny that. But at the same time, to say that they solved all of their question marks and to say that there's no longer any concerns with this unit, that would be an absolute complete overstatement. So I'm curious, Broncos country, how do you feel about the state of our offensive line this season? Do you feel like the team did do enough to upgrade this unit, or are you like me and do you feel like the team still has multiple question marks along the offensive line? Drop those comments down below, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts, as always. Be sure to leave a like on this video as well as subscribe and ring the bell so these videos appear in your notification feed. I would really appreciate it, guys. Those are 2 free and easy ways to show your support. It helps tell YouTube's algorithm to push us out to fellow members of Broncos country just like you and me. And until next time, guys, this has been another episode of Denver Broncos Syndicate. I am your host, Gage Madrid, saying peace out.